Her social life disintegrated. Friends who had once supported her now distanced themselves, unwilling to be tarnished by her scandal. By the end of the month, she had left town, retreating to a small apartment in an unfamiliar city where she hoped to escape her ruined reputation. Hey. Thanks for being here and watching this video. Let's see what story I will share with you. The sensation of coming home early is a peculiar one, especially when home feels like a distant memory. The military transport plane touched down with a jarring thud, the engines roaring one last time before winding down to an eerie quiet. I sat still, letting the reality settle in. 2 weeks ahead of schedule, 2 weeks closer to home. Relief, tenuous and unfamiliar, tugged at the edges of my thoughts. Elena and Liam. Their names had been my mantra in the chaos. I was ready to see them, to hold them, ready to step through the door and breathe in the familiar scent of our home. But the stillness at the base lingered with me, unsettling. No distant booms, no hurried commands crackling over radios. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. My body, trained for years to be taut and ready, braced for a threat that wasn't there. This wasn't vigilance. It was something deeper, something unnameable. The cab ride felt interminable. The driver, a quiet man with eyes that carried a softness I couldn't meet, seemed to sense the weight I carried. He spared me the small talk about my uniform or deployment and focused instead on the road. The low hum of the engine filled the void. I stared out at streets I'd known all my life, now scattered with subtle changes. The cafe Elena used to love had a sleek new exterior. Liam's school sported fresh paint and a sprawling playground. Familiar landmarks, yet something was off, as though the world had moved on in my absence. When the cab turned onto my street, my heart raced. I leaned forward, eager for the first glimpse of our colonial-style house, my anchor through it all. I'd imagined this moment countless times. Liam running to me, arms flung wide, Elena's joy breaking into tears. But as my eyes settled on the house, the idyllic scene I'd crafted shattered. The garden hit me first. The hydrangeas Elena had nurtured so lovingly were gone, replaced by rows of generic shrubs. The house itself, though pristine, looked wrong. It was too clean, too staged. No toys scattered on the lawn. No bike leaned haphazardly against the porch. The curtains were drawn tight, hiding whatever lay within. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch next door, her face a study in conflicting emotions. Shock, guilt, pity. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but thought better of it, retreating inside with a slam of her door. Her reaction set my nerves alight. I paid the cab driver and stepped onto the driveway. Shouldering my duffel bag, I hesitated. The house loomed before me, a stranger dressed in familiarity. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like crossing into enemy lines. The key turned smoothly in the lock, a small comfort as the tumblers clicked. But the moment the doors swung open, a wave of sterile emptiness washed over me. The scent of vanilla candles, Elena's evening ritual, was gone, replaced by nothingness. The walls, once vibrant with family photos, stood barren. The furniture was there, yet untouched, lifeless. Elena? Liam? My voice rang hollow in the quiet. No reply. I moved through the house, each step uncovering details that stung like wounds. The scuffs on the floor where Liam raced his toy cars had all but disappeared. The kitchen counters, once cluttered with baking experiments and school projects, were sterile. It wasn't just that the house looked different. It felt different. Cold. Alien. A stack of unopened mail sat on the kitchen counter. Bills and magazines addressed to Elena. None bore my name. My duffel bag slid from my shoulder to the floor near the stairs, forgotten as I stood, absorbing the strange, hollow atmosphere. Every instinct I'd honed in combat screamed at me that something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. And I couldn't shake the growing certainty that whatever had changed here would be far harder to face than any battlefield. My world hadn't paused while I was gone. It had shifted, twisted, and the truth would wait for no one. Least of all me. It wasn't until I heard Liam's voice that I realized the homecoming I'd longed for was already a memory, and my life as I knew it was about to unravel. The house was unnervingly quiet, so sterile it barely felt like a home anymore. I hadn't had time to fully take it in before I heard the unmistakable pounding of small feet on the stairs. Liam appeared at the top, his face lighting up as he shouted, "Dad!" His voice cracked with the force of his emotions. Before I could react, he launched himself at me, nearly knocking me off balance. His arms wrapped around my neck in a grip so tight it felt as if he feared I might vanish if he let go. "Hey, buddy," I managed, my voice thick as I dropped my duffel to crouch down, pulling him closer. He was so small, so heartbreakingly fragile. His hair carried a faint trace of the coconut shampoo Elena used to favor. "I knew you'd come back," he whispered, his words trembling like a fragile thread. "I missed you so much," I said, pulling back just enough to see his face. His cheeks were leaner, his eyes shadowed by something too heavy for a child to carry. There was a weariness in his gaze, a kind of guardedness I didn't recognize. "What's wrong, Liam?" I asked softly, though my stomach had already begun twisting itself into knots. He didn't answer immediately, biting his lip and averting his eyes like he was weighing whether to speak. That's when I noticed his hands, clutching the fabric of my uniform with a desperate intensity. His fingers trembled, holding on as though I were the only solid thing in a world crumbling around him. "It's okay," I assured him gently. "You can tell me anything. I'm here now." His hesitation lingered for a moment before he blurted, "Mom's at church." I frowned. Church? It wasn't Sunday, and Elena had never been devout. She's getting married," he said, the words barely audible. For a moment, I just stared, my mind refusing to process what I'd heard. "Married?" I repeated, as though saying it aloud might help it make sense. "To Uncle Mark," Liam added, his words spilling out now. "They're all there, Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Lucy." His voice trailed off, and he looked at me with a mixture of fear and uncertainty, waiting for my reaction. My knees nearly buckled as the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Uncle Mark, my best friend, my confidant, the man I'd trusted above all others. A cold fury ignited in my chest, but I forced it down. Liam didn't need my anger. He needed my steadiness. "Tell me everything, buddy," I said, keeping my voice even. "When did this start?" Liam furrowed his brow, concentrating. "Uncle Mark started coming over a lot after you left. At first, it was just for dinner. Then he started sleeping on the couch sometimes. Mom said it was because he was lonely." I felt my fists clench involuntarily, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "And when did they?" I trailed off, unable to finish the question. "A few months ago," Liam said hesitantly. "I heard them talking late at night. They didn't know I was awake. They said you chose the military over us, that you didn't want to come home." His voice broke, and tears welled in his eyes. But I didn't believe them. He added quickly, his tone almost pleading. "I remember what you told me before you left. That you were protecting us. That you loved us." I pulled him into a fierce hug, letting him cry into my shoulder. My mind was racing, piecing together the implications of what he'd told me. Mark hadn't just betrayed me. He'd invaded my life, stolen my family, and tried to rewrite my son's trust in me. "I never stopped loving you," I whispered into Liam's hair. "Don't you ever doubt that." He nodded against my shoulder, his small frame trembling. But as the weight of his words settled over me, I began to see the full extent of what had happened. The erasure of the photos, the lifeless garden, the chilling emptiness of the house. Every detail pointed to a deliberate effort to rewrite my place in their lives. "Do you want to go to the church?" I asked him, keeping my voice steady. "Or would you rather stay here?" Liam pulled back and looked up at me, his face set with a surprising determination. "I'm coming with you, Dad. I want to see their faces when they realize you're home." God, I was proud of him. My son, my brave little fighter. I cupped his face gently and nodded. "Then let's go," I said, my voice low and firm. Together, we would face the truth, whatever it turned out to be. It was time to remind them all what loyalty truly meant. I stood, clasping Liam's hand tightly in mine. The house that once held so many memories no longer felt like home. But that was irrelevant now. I wasn't here to linger. I was here to confront this betrayal head-on. Outside, the sunlight was harsh, almost blinding, and the air carried a freshness that felt out of place, as though the world was indifferent to the storm raging within me. But I wouldn't let the turmoil consume me. Not now. I had a mission, one I was determined not to fail. The drive to the church was silent, save for the faint hum of a pop song playing on the radio. It felt like heading into hostile territory, the kind of mission where the unknown lay waiting at the end. Liam sat beside me, his small hand gripping mine with an intensity that mirrored my own resolve. Every familiar landmark we passed, the park where we'd spent countless weekends, the cafe where Elena always ordered the same cappuccino, seemed tainted now. Mark and Elena. The names alone felt like a mockery, an absurd pairing that didn't belong together. But the evidence Liam had given me left no room for doubt. "Dad!" Liam's voice broke through my thoughts. "Yeah, buddy." I glanced at him, his expression pinched with worry. "Are you mad?" His question carried the innocence of a child, yet hit with the weight of an accusation. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Not at you," I said firmly. "Never at you." But at Mom and Uncle Mark, he pressed. The answer wasn't simple, and the storm of emotions swirling inside me made it harder to find the right words. "I'm upset," I admitted after a moment. "But right now, I'm focused on making things right." He nodded, his face solemn. Somehow, he seemed to understand far more than an 8-year-old should. The church came into view then, its tall white spires glinting in the sunlight, its stained glass windows reflecting flashes of color. The parking lot was packed with cars I recognized all too well. My parents' SUV, Mark's flashy sedan, Elena's hatchback. I parked at the far edge of the lot, out of sight from the main entrance, and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the wheel, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every fiber of my being screamed to storm inside, to demand answers, to tear Mark out of this facade he had built. But years of training had taught me better. Control won battles, not outbursts. Turning to Liam, I said, "Stay close to me, okay?" He nodded, his determination a mirror of my own. Together, we walked toward the church, the faint strains of the wedding march filtering through the open doors. The sound was grotesque in its incongruity, like a lullaby played in the middle of a battlefield. At the side of the building, a door stood ajar. I pushed it open without hesitation, stepping inside to find a sea of familiar faces. Friends, neighbors, family, every single one of them complicit, every single one of them silent in the face of betrayal. My eyes found the altar, and there she was, Elena, dressed in an elaborate white gown that spoke of extravagance, standing beside Mark. His hand rested casually on her back, his posture one of infuriating ease. The organist froze mid-note as the heavy bang of the door echoed through the sanctuary. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation, and all eyes turned to me. I stepped forward, each deliberate step carrying the weight of my anger. Liam stayed at my side, his small frame taut with resolve. My boots echoed against the polished floor as I approached the altar, my gaze never leaving Elena and Mark. "Don't let me interrupt," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "I just came to congratulate the happy couple." Mark's face drained of color, his self-assured smirk vanishing in an instant. Elena's bouquet trembled in her hands, and her eyes widened, flickering between shock and guilt. "Alex," she started, her voice barely audible. "Don't," I interrupted sharply, my tone brooking no argument. I turned to the crowd, sweeping my gaze over their stunned faces. Each one seemed to shrink under my scrutiny. "Let's make sure everyone here understands what's really happening," I said coldly. While I was overseas, fighting for this country, my wife and my best friend decided to play house. And now, they've decided to make it official, with the full blessing of my family. The murmurs grew louder, rippling through the congregation like an undercurrent of unease. "Mark," I said, turning my attention back to him. My voice was calm, measured, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. The truth was out now, and there would be no turning back. "You stood beside me in combat. You swore to have my back, and this is how you repay me." My voice was sharp, cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "Alex, listen," Mark started, his hands raised as if to calm me. But I wasn't in the mood for excuses. My fist connected with his jaw before he could finish. The impact was solid. Years of frustration and betrayal condensed into one blow. He staggered back, clutching his face as a thin trickle of blood formed at the corner of his mouth. Chaos erupted. Elena screamed, dropping her bouquet. My mother pushed forward, her face pale and stricken. "Alex, please." "Don't," I said, my voice steely. "You made your choice. All of you did. Now you'll have to live with it." I turned back to Elena, who stood frozen at the altar, her tear-streaked face a mix of shock and guilt. "You didn't just betray me," I said, my tone low and deliberate. "You betrayed Liam. You betrayed the family we built. And there's no coming back from that." Without waiting for a response, I reached for Liam's hand and walked down the aisle. The room, once filled with the murmur of celebration, was silent now, the congregation parting like the Red Sea as we passed. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The weight of their stares and the deafening quiet said everything. Outside, the sunlight was harsh and glaring, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Are you okay, Dad?" Liam's voice was soft, uncertain. I looked down at him, his concern etched into his small face. "I'm fine, buddy," I said, squeezing his hand. "Let's go. We got things to do." This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Instead of heading straight home, I drove. The movement helped keep my mind sharp, the distraction of navigating the familiar streets a welcome reprieve from the turmoil. Liam sat quietly in the back seat, holding a comic book he hadn't even opened. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, watching me as though he were the parent. "Where are we going, Dad?" he asked finally, his voice hesitant. "To find someone who can help," I replied, my tone steady, though my grip on the wheel betrayed my tension. This wasn't over. Mark and Elena might have played their hand, but they hadn't won. I've been taught to fight smarter, not harder. And if the military had taught me anything, it was the value of strategy. You don't win battles without allies, without information. And right now, I needed both. An hour later, I pulled up to a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of town. Its faded sign read Veteran Outreach Center, a place most people passed without a second glance. But to me, it was a gateway. I knocked twice on the worn door, and after a moment, it opened. Sarah Torres stood there, sharp-eyed and compact, exuding the same no-nonsense energy she had in the military. She had once been a force in intelligence, her mind a steel trap for details and strategy. Now, she dedicated her life to helping veterans navigate the challenges of civilian life. "Alex," she said, her expression unreadable. "I heard you were back. What's going on?" I motioned toward Liam, who hung back uncertainly. "A lot," I said grimly. "Can we come in?" Her gaze softened briefly as it landed on Liam. "Of course. Come on in, kid," she said, holding the door wider. "You look like you could use a snack." Inside, the office was cluttered but welcoming, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. Liam settled on a couch with a juice box Sarah handed him, and I leaned against the edge of her desk, gathering my thoughts. "Spill it," Sarah said, her arms folded, her gaze unwavering. "You've got that look like you just walked into an ambush." So I did. I told her everything. The silence from Elena toward the end of my deployment, the changes in the house, Liam's revelation about the wedding, and the confrontation at the church. By the time I finished, Sarah's jaw was tight, her sharp eyes blazing with anger. "Mark Weston," she said, spitting the name like a curse. "What a piece of work." Her reaction was validation, a spark of solidarity that I hadn't realized I desperately needed. For the first time since stepping off that plane, I felt like I wasn't facing this alone. "That smug son of a," Sarah began, her tone sharp, but I raised a hand to cut her off. "Yeah, him," I said, my voice flat. "And it's not just him. My parents, my sister, Elena, they're all in on it. They erased me, Sarah. They rewrote our lives while I was halfway across the world." Sarah didn't ask the obvious questions. She didn't waste time on empty sympathy or pointless speculation. That wasn't her style. Instead, she grabbed a notebook from her desk and nodded. "All right," she said, her voice calm but purposeful. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we gather intel. You don't make a move until you know who your real enemies are, what resources they're working with, and what skeletons they're hiding." I nodded. This was why I'd come to her. I wasn't just angry. I was calculating. "Mark's got a lot to lose," Sarah continued, flipping through her notes. "If he's been moving in on Elena, chances are he's made mistakes. People like him always do. They think they're untouchable, but they're sloppy underneath." "I want everything," I said, the edge in my voice unmistakable. "Financials, personal life, business dealings." "And Elena," my voice faltered slightly before I regained control. "She's been making moves too. And my parents, they financed that wedding. They helped him. They're just as guilty. Then they're complicit," Sarah said bluntly, not missing a beat. "But we start with the weakest link. Someone in that group knows something they don't want you to find out. We apply pressure there, and if they don't crack, they will," Sarah said with absolute certainty. "People like them aren't built for this kind of fight." I glanced over at Liam. He was quietly sipping his juice box, but his posture was stiff, his eyes darting between us. Even at his age, he could sense the tension. "Liam," I said gently, "why don't you check out the library in the back? There are books and games. I need to talk with Miss Sarah for a bit." He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, but finally nodded and slipped away, his small shoulders far too tense for a child. Sarah waited until he was out of earshot before speaking again. "How's he holding up?" "He's strong," I said, my voice heavy. "Stronger than he should have to be. He doesn't deserve any of this." "No, he doesn't," Sarah agreed. Her tone softened briefly before regaining its edge. "Which is why we're going to make sure you come out of this on top." For the next hour, we crafted a strategy. Sarah pulled up public records on her laptop, piecing together a puzzle that hinted at deeper secrets. Mark's financials were riddled with inconsistencies, shady tax filings, inflated projections, whispers of unethical shortcuts. He wasn't just morally corrupt, he was teetering on financial collapse. Elena wasn't clean either. Several large withdrawals had been made from our joint account while I was overseas, amounts that didn't add up. My parents, the ones who had always claimed to be pillars of support, had transferred money to an unlisted account just before they'd gone silent on me. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. By the time Liam and I left the outreach center, my mind was racing with possibilities. Liam climbed into the back seat without a word, his unspoken questions filling the air. "Dad," he said eventually, breaking the silence as I started the engine. "Is Miss Sarah going to help us?" "She already is," I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "But this is going to take time, buddy. We're not just fighting to win. We're fighting to make sure they can never hurt us again." His little face set with determination. "Like a mission?" "Exactly," I said, offering a faint smile. "And I don't lose missions." As we drove away, a flicker of hope sparked inside me, small but growing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. The days after that meeting with Sarah felt like preparing for deployment all over again. But this time, the battlefield wasn't in some foreign country. It was here in my life, and the enemy wasn't a faceless threat. It was people I had trusted, people who had no idea what kind of fight they just started. Sarah moved fast. Within 48 hours, she handed me a dossier thick with evidence that began to clarify the web of betrayal. Mark Weston's life wasn't the polished success story he liked to present. His finances were a mess. Questionable tax filings, inflated promises to investors, and rumors of unethical practices in his business contracts. He wasn't just a liar. He was a man on the brink of ruin. Then there was Elena, my wife, or at least the woman who used to be. Sarah's investigation revealed a trail of suspicious transactions linked to Elena. She had siphoned money from our joint savings account, each withdrawal meticulously kept below the threshold that would raise red flags. The funds were spent on indulgences, high-end clothing, lavish dinners, and even a stay at an exclusive resort I'd never heard of. My parents were no better. Months before my return, they had funneled money into Mark's account, cloaking it as a family investment. Lucy, my sister, had played her part too, acting as a messenger and enabler for Mark and Elena when their plans needed covering. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated conspiracy. And in their eyes, I was the casualty, discarded without hesitation. So, what's the plan? I asked Sarah, leaning forward as we sifted through the mountain of evidence in her cramped office. A knowing smirk tugged at her lips. We apply pressure, she said, piece by piece. People like Mark and Elena thrive on controlling the story. We're going to take that away from them. I nodded. Let's do it. The first move hit Mark where it hurt the most. His business. Sarah contacted an ally in the financial sector, anonymously forwarding evidence of Mark's questionable practices to his largest investor. The documents weren't overtly damning, but they were enough to raise eyebrows and spark unease. Within days, his business partners began to pull out, deals fell through, and accounts were frozen. I could almost see the panic etched on Mark's face as the calls poured in. The second strike targeted Elena. She had weaponized her teaching career, crafting an image of a dedicated, overburdened mother abandoned by a callous soldier. The reality, of course, was far less virtuous. Sarah uncovered long-buried complaints from her school, a litany of grievances from parents and colleagues. While no single issue was incriminating, together, they painted a damning portrait of someone unfit for the role she so publicly flaunted. We packaged the information and sent it to the school board. The result? A formal review of her position, and soon after, administrative leave. Next came my family's complicity. This was the hardest blow for me to plan. The sting of their betrayal still fresh and raw. But Sarah's findings left no room for doubt. Financial records tied my parents directly to Mark and Elena's wedding expenses. Email threads revealed chilling conversations about how to handle my return. My father's detached, strategic tone. My mother's hollow justifications. Lucy's casual indifference. We compiled the damning evidence and delivered it to their closest social and professional circles. Anonymously, of course, the fallout was swift. Whispers spread, reputations tarnished, and suddenly, the invitations to social events stopped coming. My parents' phone calls to me increased in frequency, each one unanswered. This wasn't just about retaliation, it was about control. Sarah and I spent countless nights strategizing, anticipating their moves, and staying ahead. Mark scrambled to stabilize his collapsing business, reaching out to new investors. Elena spun her tale of woe to mutual friends, trying to salvage sympathy. My parents hosted dinners and meetings, desperate to rebuild their crumbling social standing. Every time they moved, we countered. The first major crack appeared when Mark's assistant resigned, citing harassment. Sarah had uncovered the allegations and ensured they reached the right people. With her departure, Mark's company spiraled further into chaos. Then came the school board's decision to place Elena on indefinite leave. Public gossip about her personal life made her a liability they were unwilling to shoulder. My parents were next. Their once flawless social calendar became barren as friends distanced themselves, wary of association with the growing scandal. Lucy, too, faced the icy sting of ostracism, her social circle shrinking by the day. Amid all this, my focus never wavered from Liam. He was my anchor, the one thing that kept me grounded. Protecting him was my top priority. I shielded him from the worst of the fallout, carefully answering his questions with honesty, but tempered by compassion. "Why are they doing this, Dad?" he asked one evening, his voice small but steady. "Because sometimes people make choices that hurt others," I replied, meeting his gaze. "And those choices have consequences?" He nodded, seeming to absorb the lesson. Justice wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rage. It was about accountability, about ensuring that those who tore apart my life faced the repercussions of their actions. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time I felt like I was winning. One night, as Liam and I sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me with those wide, earnest eyes that always managed to pierce straight to my heart. "You're fighting for us, aren't you, Dad?" I ruffled his hair, smiling despite the heaviness that seemed ever present these days. Always, buddy. Always. The first phase of our counterattack had gone smoothly, the groundwork laid with precision and care. But this wasn't the end. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. If they thought they could dismantle my life and walk away without consequence, they had another thing coming. The legal papers arrived on a crisp morning, delivered by courier in a pristine manila envelope bearing the name of Elena's lawyer. Even before I opened it, I knew what it was. Custody. The document was thick, brimming with the kind of legal jargon designed to intimidate. But its message was clear. Elena and Mark were filing for full custody of Liam. Their justification? That I was an unstable veteran, consumed by anger and incapable of providing a stable home. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers tracing the edges of the folder as I read, line by line, their accusations. They had painted me as a danger to my own child, a man so haunted by war that I couldn't tell reality from paranoia. My stomach churned as I processed the sheer audacity of it. For a moment, the anger threatened to take over, but then I heard Liam's voice from the living room. He was humming softly, immersed in building a Lego masterpiece on the coffee table, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond his world. I wouldn't let them take him. Not now. Not ever. The first call I made was to Sarah. "This isn't just a battle anymore," I said, my voice tight but controlled. "It's war." Sarah, unflappable as ever, responded without hesitation. "Then let's make sure you're ready. Send me the papers, Alex. You're not going through this alone." For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of relief. Within days, Sarah had assembled a counteroffensive that was as methodical as it was ruthless. She introduced me to Maria Gonzalez, a family law attorney with a reputation for dismantling opposing arguments with surgical precision. Maria exuded a calm intensity, the kind that made you feel like you were already winning just by having her on your side. She reviewed the custody filing, her brow furrowing as she flipped through the pages. "They're trying to weaponize your military service against you," she said, her tone icy with disdain. "It's disgusting, but predictable. The good news is, we have the truth on our side, and we're going to use it." Maria laid out the strategy, not just to defend, but to expose. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to alienate Liam from me would be brought to light. The weeks leading up to the hearing blurred into a frenzy of preparation. Sarah worked tirelessly, unearthing evidence that tore apart the narrative Elena and Mark were trying to construct. We secured character witnesses, fellow soldiers, commanding officers, even military psychologists who could attest to my stability and integrity. Colonel Davidson, my former commanding officer, wrote a glowing statement. "Major Reed is one of the most disciplined and grounded officers I've ever served with. The idea that he's unstable is not only false, but an insult to his service." Then came the documentation. Sarah uncovered recordings of Elena and Mark coaching Liam to lie about me, their whispered manipulations chilling in their audacity. Financial records showed how they drained joint accounts, spinning a false narrative of my absence while using my money to fund their schemes. The most damning evidence? Emails between Elena and Mark, coldly strategizing ways to discredit me. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with Liam at my side. His small hand gripped mine tightly, a quiet reassurance that steadied me. Maria flanked me, her briefcase brimming with evidence. Elena and Mark sat across the room, their lawyer radiating smug confidence. But the cracks began to show the moment Maria started her opening argument. "Let's discuss this so-called instability," Maria began, her tone calm, but laced with razor-sharp precision. "Here are Major Reed's psychological evaluations, all of which consistently show exemplary mental health." She stepped forward, holding up a transcript. "And here we have recordings of Mrs. Reed and Mr. Weston coaching Liam to lie about his father. The same father they claim is unfit to care for him." The courtroom fell silent as Maria dismantled their case piece by piece. By the time the first day of the hearing ended, their lawyer's confidence had visibly eroded. Elena's face was pale, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. Mark shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. That night, Liam and I sat on the couch again, the tension from the day slowly dissipating. You're really fighting for us, aren't you, Dad? Liam asks softly, his gaze steady. I ruffle his hair, smiling. Always, buddy. Always. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like justice was within reach. Not just for me, but for us. The room was utterly silent as the recordings played, Elena's voice chillingly clear as she whispered instructions to Liam. Just say Daddy scares you sometimes, that he gets angry a lot. It's for the best, honey. Elena's face turned ashen, her lawyer fumbling for a rebuttal, but the damage was already done. Maria pressed on, methodically presenting the financial records, the character testimonials, and even Liam's school essays, filled with heartfelt words about how much he missed me. The most pivotal moment came when Liam took the stand. At first, he was nervous, his small frame trembling slightly. But when he met my eyes, his confidence blossomed. They told me to lie about my dad, he said, his voice clear and unwavering. But my dad's a hero. He loves me and protects me. He's the best dad in the world. The words landed like a hammer. Elena burst into tears, Mark muttering curses under his breath until the judge silenced them with a glare. When the judge finally spoke, their decision felt like the air had been released from a suffocating room. Major Reed has demonstrated not only his fitness as a parent, but his unwavering commitment to his son's well-being. Full custody is granted to Major Reed. Mrs. Reed's visitation will be supervised, and her attempts to manipulate her child will be noted in all future proceedings. I exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over me. Liam ran into my arms, holding me tightly as tears pricked my eyes. We had done it. Walking out of the courtroom, the victory was palpable. Elena tried to approach, her face streaked with tears. Alex, please, she said, her voice breaking. We can work this out. I turned to her, my tone cutting and final. You already made your choice, Elena. Now you'll live with it. Liam squeezed my hand as we stepped into the sunlight, a moment of warmth breaking through the storm. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly free. The battle for custody was over. But the war? That was just beginning. The fallout began almost immediately. The custody victory was one piece of the puzzle. The next step was ensuring that the truth reverberated beyond the courtroom. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about exposing their betrayal in a way they couldn't hide from. Enter Mia Collins, a journalist with a reputation for fearless investigative work. We met late one evening in Sarah's office. Mia arrived prepared, her notepad already brimming with questions. Let's get to it, Major Reed, she said, her pen poised. You've got a hell of a story. Let's make sure we tell it right. I didn't hold back. I laid everything bare, the lies, the conspiracies, the custody battle. I handed over every piece of evidence Sarah and I had compiled. Financial statements, recordings, court documents, and more. As I spoke, Mia's expression shifted from intrigue to outrage. They really thought they'd get away with this, she muttered, flipping through the files. They didn't count on me coming back, I replied evenly. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. No, they didn't. But they're about to learn why they shouldn't have underestimated you. 2 weeks later, the article hit the front page of the local newspaper. The headline was as sharp as a blade. Betrayed on the battlefield. A soldier's fight for justice against family and friends. Mia's piece was relentless. She didn't just recount the betrayal. She wove a powerful narrative about loyalty, sacrifice, and deception. She described in vivid detail what it meant for a soldier to risk everything on the front lines while his family schemed behind his back. She exposed Mark Weston's fraudulent business practices, Elena's financial misdeeds, and my parents' calculated complicity. Colonel Davidson's glowing testimony was quoted prominently, juxtaposed with excerpts from Liam's heartfelt school essays. The final blow came with the photos. One showed Elena in her wedding dress, standing beside Mark at the altar, my parents and sister smiling in the front row. Beside it was an image of me in a combat zone, dirt-streaked and surrounded by fellow soldiers. The contrast was devastating. The impact was immediate. Within hours, the article went viral, sparking outrage and sympathy in equal measure. Mark's business associates began pulling out of deals en masse, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. Elena faced mounting pressure from her community, her carefully constructed image crumbling under public scrutiny. Even my parents and Lucy weren't spared. Their social circles evaporated almost overnight, leaving them isolated and reeling from the backlash. For the first time, the tide had turned completely. The truth was no longer something they could bury. It was out there, loud and undeniable, and it was clear they had underestimated me at every step. This wasn't just justice, it was vindication. And it was only the beginning of rebuilding the life they had tried to destroy. Social media erupted in outrage. Military groups shared the story far and wide, condemning the actions of Elena, Mark, and my family with an intensity that left no room for ambiguity. Comments flooded the newspaper's website, some from veterans who had endured similar betrayals, others from civilians appalled by the sheer audacity of it all. The veterans community rallied around me. Messages of support came pouring in from strangers, fellow soldiers, their families, even civilians who understood the sacrifices we made. Mark, Elena, and my family, on the other hand, found themselves pariahs almost overnight. Mark's business partners began severing ties. Investors demanded answers, and the company's stock plummeted. Within days, the board forced him to resign as CEO. Elena faced a similar reckoning. Her school board placed her on indefinite leave, citing the controversy as an unacceptable distraction. Parents of her students petitioned for her permanent removal, branding her a disgrace. As for my parents, their carefully curated social lives collapsed. Friends who once reveled in their status now avoided them, unwilling to associate with the scandal. My sister, Lucy, wasn't spared either. Her once thriving career as a real estate agent crumbled, her reputation destroyed. The phone call started soon after. "Alex, we need to talk," my mother's trembling voice began. "This has gone too far." "You made your choice," I replied, my tone ice cold. "Now you'll live with the consequences." Her crying on the other end of the line elicited no sympathy. It was far too late for that. Next came Mark, his tone bitter and frantic. "You've destroyed everything. My business, my reputation." "I didn't destroy anything," I said sharply. "You did the moment you betrayed me." Elena's message was the most pitiful. She left a voicemail, her voice cracking with emotion. "Alex, please, we can fix this for Liam's sake." I deleted it before she could finish. What none of them seemed to grasp was that this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. They had spent months, perhaps years, erasing me from my own life, rewriting the narrative to suit their lives. Now I had taken control of the story. Mia's article didn't just expose their actions. It forced them to confront the reality they had created. Under the harsh light of public scrutiny, their fabrications crumbled. And Liam? He saw it all. He watched as the world rallied behind us, as strangers validated the truth of what had happened. It gave him something I couldn't fully articulate: vindication. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Liam looked up at me and said, "They can't hurt us anymore, can they?" "No," I replied, pulling him close. "They can't." The fallout reverberated for weeks. Every time Elena, Mark, or my parents tried to regain their footing, the story re-emerged, louder than before. Veterans groups made their presence known at public events where Mark attempted damage control, their conversations about loyalty and betrayal impossible to ignore. Elena's efforts to paint herself as a victim fell flat. Her actions, laid bare for the world to see, drowned out any narrative she tried to spin. My parents, once pillars of their community, became pariahs, their silence steeped in irrelevance. This wasn't just a victory, it was a warning, to them and to anyone who thought betrayal came without consequences. Justice wasn't just served, it was relentless. I'd heard people say that karma always catches up, but watching the fallout unfold in real time, I realized karma wasn't just catching up, it was bulldozing them. Every lie, every betrayal, every selfish choice came back to crush them under the weight of their own actions. Mark was the first to fall. His business empire, already on shaky ground after Mia's article, collapsed spectacularly. Anonymous tips, courtesy of Sarah's meticulous research, exposed fraudulent contracts, falsified tax filings, and gross mismanagement. The SEC launched an investigation within a week. By the second, Mark's company had been delisted from the stock exchange. Investors abandoned him en masse, leaving him scrambling to salvage what little he could. Surveillance footage Sarah uncovered showed Mark pacing outside his office, sweat staining his expensive suit as he barked into his phone. The confident, polished man I had once trusted was gone, replaced by someone unraveling at the seams. Elena wasn't far behind. Her attempts to shield herself behind her role as a teacher crumbled as parents demanded her resignation. The school board couldn't ignore the growing controversy and placed her on extended leave. Public sentiment turned against her. Her social media accounts flooded with comments condemning her actions. Even my parents couldn't escape. Their once pristine reputation was now a smoldering wreck. Invitations to events dried up, and friends turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with their betrayal. Lucy, too, was cast out, her clients abandoning her in favor of agents they could actually trust. Through it all, Liam remained my anchor. I made sure he was protected, his world insulated from the noise as much as possible. And as the dust settled, he began to rebuild, just as I did. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. The truth had prevailed, and with it came the quiet satisfaction of justice served. Then came the lawsuits. One after another, Mark's former partners and clients turned against him, filing claims for financial damages caused by his fraudulent practices. The legal bills piled up faster than he could pay them, stripping him of whatever resources he had left. The polished image of a successful entrepreneur he once flaunted was shattered, replaced by headlines branding him a con artist. The final nail in his professional coffin came when his assistant resigned, citing a toxic work environment. Her resignation wasn't just a quiet departure. It came with a formal complaint that sparked an HR investigation. By the time the dust settled, Mark wasn't just disgraced, he was untouchable. Elena didn't fare any better. Mia's article had been devastating, but the aftermath was even worse. Parents at her school, already uneasy after the revelations, began digging into her past. Complaints of unprofessional behavior that she dismissed as trivial resurfaced with a vengeance. The school board, under mounting pressure, placed her on administrative leave. But for the outraged parents, that wasn't enough. Whispers turned into demands, and soon a petition circulated, calling for her permanent removal. I stayed out of it, letting the truth do the work for me. The situation escalated when a local veterans group got involved, organizing protests outside the school. Signs bearing slogans like "Betrayal has consequences" and "Support soldiers, not their betrayers" left no room for ambiguity. Elena resigned the next day, but her troubles didn't end there. The withdrawals from our joint account, uncovered during the divorce proceedings, weren't just suspicious, they were potentially illegal. Maria, my lawyer, filed for financial restitution, leaving Elena unable to justify her actions. The court ordered her to repay every cent she had taken, plunging her into debt. Her social life disintegrated. Friends who had once supported her now distanced themselves, unwilling to be tarnished by her scandal. By the end of the month, she had left town, retreating to a small apartment in an unfamiliar city where she hoped to escape her ruined reputation. My parents and Lucy fared no better. They had underestimated the power of exposure. Their involvement in the betrayal, meticulously documented through emails, financial transactions, and photographs, became public knowledge. Sarah ensured the evidence reached the right hands: business associates, community leaders, and the elite circles my parents once prized. Invitations to events dried up, and whispers of their complicity followed them everywhere. My father, once a respected businessman, was pressured into early retirement. His reputation, built over decades, was now synonymous with deceit. My mother's carefully curated social standing crumbled as charity boards and committees demanded her resignation. Her friends, fearful of association, abandoned her. Lucy faced the harshest fallout. Her real estate career, built on trust, collapsed overnight. Clients canceled contracts, her license was suspended, and financial ruin followed. Her marriage didn't survive either. Her husband, angry at the consequences of her actions, filed for divorce. The most satisfying part of their downfall wasn't witnessing it, it was knowing they had done it to themselves. I hadn't fabricated evidence or twisted the truth. Their suffering was the natural consequence of their choices, laid bare for the world to see. Mark ended up in a cramped apartment, scraping by with a menial job. Elena tried to rebuild her life in another state, but whispers of her past trailed her like a shadow. My parents retreated to their vacation home, isolated and irrelevant. Lucy, once smug and secure, now worked a retail job to make ends meet. For me, the end of this saga wasn't marked by triumph, but by relief. Liam and I could finally move forward, unburdened by their manipulations. One evening, as we played chess at the kitchen table, Liam looked up at me, his expression thoughtful. "Dad, why did they do it? Why did they hurt us?" I paused, considering how to answer. "Sometimes, buddy, people let their selfishness get the better of them. They think they can take shortcuts and not face the consequences. But life doesn't work that way." He nodded solemnly, moving his knight to check my king. "Well, they lost." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, they did." This journey wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring they could never hurt us again. The truth had been their undoing, and Liam and I, at long last, were free. Rebuilding a life after betrayal is like repairing a house after a storm. It's slow, messy, and demands a solid foundation. But piece by piece, we were building something stronger, something unshakable. The victories in court and the fallout from exposing the truth were only the beginning. Liam and I were left to rebuild, piecing together the fragments of a life that had been shattered. Our new rental home felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, in those first few weeks. The walls were bare, the rooms eerily quiet, and an unshakable heaviness lingered in the air. One evening, as I sat on the couch watching Liam methodically stack Legos, it struck me. The only way forward was to create something new. Not just a home, but a life. Liam needed stability, a sense of security that had been ripped away from him. Every morning, I made breakfast. It started with burnt toast and lumpy scrambled eggs, but I got better. I walked him to the bus stop, something I'd never done before deployments took me away. When he came home, I was there, ready to hear about his day, help with homework, or play catch in the yard. One night, as we assembled a new bookshelf, Liam paused and looked up at me. "We're gonna be okay, right, Dad?" I stopped, the screwdriver in my hand, and gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Yeah, buddy, we are." Those moments became the bedrock of our new life. While Liam adjusted quickly, I had my own battles to fight. Late at night, when the house was still, memories of betrayal crept in. The faces of my parents, my sister Elena, and Mark haunting me with echoes of their words and actions. One night, I found myself staring at the phone, torn between calling my mother to demand answers or leaving that chapter of my life behind. In the end, I chose the latter. Instead of dwelling on the past, I threw myself into building a future for Liam and me. Together with Sarah, I started a consulting firm, Reed Security Solutions. We specialized in helping veterans transition to civilian life and guiding companies in loyalty and ethical practices. It felt good to work with people I trusted, creating something meaningful. Liam had questions, so many questions. Why did Mom and Uncle Mark do that? Why didn't Grandma and Grandpa stop them? Why do people hurt others? I didn't always have answers, but I made sure Liam understood one thing: the importance of honor and integrity. During long dinners, chess games, or walks with the dog he insisted we adopt, I shared stories from my time in the military. "Loyalty matters, buddy," I'd tell him. "It's what holds us together. It's what makes us good. I won't be like them," he said one evening, his voice steady with conviction. "I know you won't," I replied. As the months turned into years, Liam thrived. He grew stronger, more confident, and fiercely determined. He joined the soccer team, aced his classes, and even began helping with small tasks at the consulting firm. One day, he came home with a school assignment to write about someone who inspired him. He chose me. "I wrote about how you fought for me, Dad," he said, handing me the paper. "Not just in court, but here, every day." I was speechless, pulling him into a hug. I felt a surge of pride and gratitude that words couldn't express. 5 years later, Liam and I stood among the crowd at a military academy graduation. He was 13 now, tall for his age, and carried himself with a confidence that made my chest swell. I had been invited to speak to the graduating cadets, sharing lessons about loyalty and the weight of choices. As I stepped onto the stage, I saw Liam in the audience, seated between Sarah and Jessica, my wife. Jessica, a military widow, understood the sacrifices and struggles that had shaped my journey. Honor, I began, my voice steady, is not just a word. It's a choice. It's the foundation of who we are and what we do. You'll face tests on the battlefield and in life. And when that happens, remember this: your choices define you, and the consequences of those choices follow you forever. The cadets listened intently, their faces resolute. But it was Liam's expression, filled with pride and understanding, that stayed with me. That evening, as we returned home, Liam asked, "Do you think they regret it? What they did to us?" I considered his question carefully. "Probably," I said. "But their regret doesn't matter. What matters is that we didn't let it break us. We built something stronger." Liam nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we did." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Liam was happy. Our life was stable, and the people who had tried to destroy us were left to live with the consequences of their choices. We were finally free. We didn't just rebuild our lives. We created a legacy, one rooted in honor, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. It wasn't easy, and the scars of betrayal didn't fade overnight, but every step we took brought us closer to something greater, a life defined not by what we had lost, but by what we had built. As I leaned against the doorway, watching Liam laugh with Jessica in the kitchen, a warmth filled the spaces that had once felt so empty. Their laughter was light, genuine, and full of a hope that no betrayal could ever tarnish. In that moment, I realized that what we had now was something invincible. They had tried to take everything from us: our trust, our happiness, our sense of security. But what they hadn't understood, and what they could never grasp, was that they couldn't destroy what we were capable of building. We had a future now, one brimming with hope, fortified by strength, and guided by the truth we refused to compromise. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could breathe freely. I could see a horizon unmarred by shadows. We were free, and that freedom wasn't just a second chance. It was a triumph. At Reddit Cheating Stories, we don't just tell tales of betrayal. We share stories of resilience, strength, and the power of rebuilding. This story isn't just about loss. It's about rising above and creating a legacy built on honor and truth. They tried to take everything, but they couldn't destroy what was rebuilt. A future filled with hope, strength, and unwavering bonds. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Reddit Cheating Stories. Together, we can remind the world that no matter how deep the betrayal, the strength to rebuild is always within us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.